The trial, no one wanted to look too closely at. Some stories never make headlines until someone refuses to let them be buried. This one began like so many others in America's courtroom halls, another tragic case brushed with luxury, race, and power. A young black activist dead under suspicious circumstances, a billionaire son of a senator on trial, cameras, headlines, debates, but inside that jury box sat someone no one expected to matter. Clara James, a quiet, middle-aged black woman with librarian eyes and a spine of iron. To most, she was invisible, but what they didn't know, what the entire courtroom couldn't see, was that she wasn't just sitting on a jury. She was sitting on decades of knowing how quickly justice disappears when no one watches. This story is about the woman who saw everything they tried to hide, and chose not to stay silent, and it all began the moment she realized she was the only one in the room. The only one in the room. The jury box was a sea of beige, tan suits, gray blazers, and pale faces shifting uncomfortably under the glare of courtroom lights. 11 jurors sat with casual detachment, flipping notebooks, sneaking glances at the defendant's legal team. And then there was her Clara James, seated quietly in the corner, hands folded, posture composed, the only black woman in the room. She had felt the weight of it the moment she walked through those grand courthouse doors. Not the physical heaviness, but something deeper, historical, generational, a sense that she wasn't just there for civic duty, but for something bigger. The attorneys hadn't looked at her long during voir dire. Maybe they assumed she'd be passive or too soft. Maybe they simply didn't expect much from a retired librarian with graying curls and a calm voice. But Clara knew how the world worked when you were the only one like you in the room. She'd spent a lifetime learning how to listen harder, observe deeper, and choose her moments wisely. As the judge called the trial to order, she glanced toward the defendant, Jared Langford, billionaire tech heir, young, sharp, jawed, oozing entitlement behind his sleek designer suit. His eyes scanned the jury briefly. When they landed on Clara, they didn't linger, but Clara lingered on his expression, on the calculated calm, on the faint trace of contempt curled at the corners of his mouth. She didn't know exactly what was coming, but her instincts whispered something louder than words. Pay attention, he doesn't think you matter. A voice silenced too soon. The prosecution opened with a picture of the victim. Imani Rhodes, 24 years old, a fierce activist, recent law school graduate, and founder of a social justice coalition sweeping through the South. She had a fire in her that made people uncomfortable, and that, Clara knew, was exactly what made her dangerous to people like Jared Langford. The story was already familiar. Headlines screamed of a tragic accident on Langford's yacht. A private party, waves of champagne, and at sunrise, Imani's body found floating near the marina dock. She had been the only black guest on the boat, and now, just like that, she was gone. But as prosecutors presented pictures of Imani, her smile wide, her fist raised on protest lines, Clara felt a chill. Something didn't add up. The official narrative was already being shaped before evidence was even fully presented. Imani had too much to drink. She must have fallen. The party was wild. No one noticed until it was too late. A sorrowful, if unfortunate, accident, but Clara didn't buy it. She recognized the tone, how easily the media, the defense, even the courtroom air tried to reduce Imani to just another reckless young woman who made a fatal mistake, the same way society often tried to diminish powerful black voices into footnotes. Imani hadn't drowned in silence, Clara thought. She had been silenced, and now the only black woman left in the courtroom, the only one in the box, felt a stirring, a quiet oath inside her. I will listen. I will not let them erase her. The golden boy with the Teflon smile, Jared Langford, sat in the defendant's chair like it was a throne. Clean, cut, charismatic, with just enough charm to look humble when the cameras were on. Son of Senator Douglas Langford, heir to $1 billion tech empire, Jared wasn't used to being questioned, let alone accused. The prosecution called him the last person to see Imani Rhodes alive. But to the world, Jared was the perfect image of privilege wrapped in polished innocence. His lawyers painted him as a generous host, horrified by what happened. They spoke with rehearsed grief, shaking heads, using words like tragedy and freak accident. Clara, however, saw beneath the gloss. Jared barely glanced at the photos of Imani's lifeless body. When he did, it wasn't with pain, it was inconvenience, the way someone might react to bad press, not a lost life. The jury, 10 white, 1 Latino, and Clara, watched silently. Most accepted his innocence as natural. Clara didn't. She'd seen too many Jareds in her life, and she knew the mask they wore. A rush to judgment when the jury entered deliberations for the first time. Early in the trial it wasn't formal, but the tone was clear. Whispers between breaks, shrugs at evidence, and always the unspoken phrase, "seems like an accident." It unsettled Clara. Curtis, the loudest voice among the jurors, was quick to label the case a waste of time. "There's no way a guy like Langford murders someone, especially not in front of 20 people." His confidence was contagious. Others nodded, eager to move on. To Clara, this rush to judgment wasn't just premature, it was dangerous. They had barely heard all the evidence, and already they were dismissing Imani as collateral damage to a party gone wrong. Her name was slipping from their tongues like an afterthought, but Clara wouldn't let that happen. She knew history repeated itself when no one dared to challenge the easy version of the story. She stayed silent, watching, listening, waiting, because when the time came to speak, she would make sure they all listened. The testimony they wanted to forget it was a quiet voice, timid, accented, but trembling with truth, that cracked the courtroom silence wide open. Maria Delacroix, a housekeeping staff member aboard Jared Langford's yacht, took the stand on day 5. Nervous fingers clutched her small cross necklace as she glanced toward the jury box. Most jurors barely acknowledged her, except Clara. She leaned in, sensing something real. Maria described cleaning the upper deck when she heard raised voices. A man, a woman, arguing, angry, then silence, and then, she said through the interpreter, "I thought I heard water, a splash." The defense lawyer dismissed her quickly, calling her memory unreliable. The interpreter rushed through her words, skipping the tremble in her voice, her sudden pause after the word push. But Clara didn't miss it. No one else seemed to care, but for Clara, Maria's testimony lit a match in the dark. The puzzle suddenly had a loose thread, and Clara, patient and sharp-eyed, knew how to pull it until the whole truth unraveled. The article that spoke from the grave that night. Clara returned to her hotel room with Maria's words echoing in her mind. She couldn't sleep. Her instincts were buzzing, screaming, really, that something had been buried deep. She opened her laptop and typed in Imani Rhodes. Up came a string of blogs, protest clips, and one op-ed that stopped Clara cold. The Langford legacy, dirty money and drowned voices. In it, Imani called out Jared Langford by name, accusing his foundation of funneling money into anti-black legislation and police expansion programs in the South. The article was fierce, bold, and recent. Clara's breath caught. This wasn't just some random activist invited to a party. This was a woman who had threatened to expose Jared Langford's empire, and weeks later she was dead. A drunken accident now felt too convenient. Clara realized she wasn't just sitting in on a trial. She might be the last person who could connect the dots, because someone had silenced Imani Rhodes, but Clara would not let her stay silent. The librarian strikes back. The jury room was sterile. White walls, fluorescent lights, and a rectangular table where justice teetered on the edge of apathy. Most of the jurors were ready to vote, even before deliberations formally began. The consensus, accident, move on, but Clara James, the soft-spoken librarian, refused to nod along. She didn't raise her voice. She raised questions. Why would Jared invite a woman he publicly clashed with? What happened after their argument? What about the bruises the coroner mentioned, explained by what exactly? Curtis, the foreman, rolled his eyes. She probably tripped or jumped. Protesters love drama. Clara locked eyes with him, unshaken. She wasn't drama, she was deliberate. Some of the jurors chuckled. One young woman stopped smiling. She looked at Clara differently now, thoughtfully. Clara's words didn't shout, they planted seeds. The kind that quietly split concrete over time, because if no one else would challenge the easy narrative, then she would, even if it meant standing alone. The line that changed everything the next morning, Clara made her move. She requested they re-listen to Maria de Lacroze's translated testimony. The others groaned. Curtis was annoyed. She already spoke, didn't say anything useful. But Clara persisted. The audio played. This time, Clara interrupted the interpreter. "Stop! Let her speak in Spanish." Slowly, one juror knew enough to help, and when Maria's real words echoed in the room, the energy shifted. "He pushed her. I heard the splash. I thought it was a fish." Then the music stopped. Clara's heart pounded. There it was. The original translation had skipped the word pushed, omitted the splash, censored the fear. The room went quiet. Curtis stood still, jaw clenched. A few jurors looked shaken. One even whispered, "Wait, what?" Clara folded her hands. She didn't fall. She was pushed. That's not an accident. That's murder. And in that moment, the tide began to turn, not with a bang, but with the whisper of truth finally being heard. A battle for the truth. The jury room was no longer quiet. After Maria's real words were heard, the one settled jury splintered. Whispers turned to debates, certainty into doubt. 7 jurors now leaned toward guilt. 5 were unsure. Curtis, he was fuming. She could be lying. He snapped. Housekeepers hear things wrong. Maybe she misunderstood. But Clara leaned in, calm, unshaken, or maybe we misunderstood her on purpose. She laid it all out to Manny's article, her confrontation with Jared, the bruises on her arms, and now the crucial testimony. It all fit, not perfectly, but truth never did. What was once a whisper in Clara's mind was now a roar. Curtis lashed out, "You think you're smarter than all of us." Clara replied, steady as ever, "No, I just think I'm paying attention." And for the first time, the jury wasn't just listening to her. They were following her lead. The scales of justice began to tip. One voice had become momentum. Justice has her name by the next morning. The jury's final vote was unanimous, guilty. Second-degree murder. The courtroom was silent as the verdict was read. Jared Langford's mask cracked just slightly, a flicker of disbelief, of loss, for once his loss. The judge's gavel fell like thunder. Reporters swarmed the steps, chasing jurors for comment. Most dodged the spotlight, but Clara James stood still, facing the cameras like a statue carved from resilience. She was more than a headline, she said softly. Imani Rhodes had something to say. She died for it. Today we said it for her. A reporter asked if Clara feared backlash. She gave a tired smile. Backlash is familiar, justice isn't. And with that, Clara walked away, not a lawyer, not a politician, but a woman who reminded the world what a voice, one voice, can do when it refuses to stay silent. Imani was gone, but her truth had finally been heard. When one voice becomes enough in the end, it wasn't the prosecutors who turned the tide, not the media, not the headlines, not the law books stacked in the corner of that courtroom. It was one woman who refused to look away. Clara James didn't wear a badge or hold a title. She didn't shout, didn't accuse, didn't grandstand. She simply listened when no one else would. She believed the woman everyone tried to forget, and she dared to ask the questions that made the truth impossible to ignore. Imani Rhodes didn't survive that night, but because of Clara, her voice did. This wasn't just a verdict against a murderer. It was a verdict against silence, against dismissal, against the idea that some lives are easier to forget than others. And somewhere, if there is justice beyond walls and gavels, Imani's soul whispered, "Thank you," because finally someone listened, and someone made sure the world did too.